ultimately, I think we all want to aspire to have a brand that stands out from the other brands and our personal brands as well. And this is the ones that I chose. And then last but not least, Zoom recently came out with this announcement a couple days ago that over Thanksgiving, Faye, tell them what you want to tell them what Zoom is doing?
Yeah, I think that it's really wonderful. So Zoom is saying, excuse me, we need to connect with one another. And we don't need to do it in 40 minutes. And so for Thanksgiving, Zoom has relaxed the 40-minute time limit for its free folks. And so it's kind of their goodwill effort. But larger than that, when we talk about brand, it's creating buzz. And
Yes.
so if no one had tried it before, now here is a no risk opportunity to try it. I sent out a text to my siblings last night. We're
About it?
planning, yeah, we're planning Thanksgiving. And, of course, in the environment that we're in, it's not good for us to be together. So
Yeah.
we're in Alabama. My parents will stay in the sitting room inside their home.
Mhm.
And then four of my siblings are coming, and we will be socially distanced. Each family is sitting at their own table.
Very
But the
nice.
ones that can't come, we're like, well, I want to be there. I want to be there. So my younger sister says, well, I'll coordinate the Zoom, but it's only 40 minutes. My older sister says, not for Thanksgiving.
It's
So
more. Oh, it's even more.
it became part of the conversation. And because it became part of the conversation, there was a shift in perception.
Of
So
that
when we
brand.
talk about this whole brand thing, we begin to think, how can this brand leverage what it does to bring us together, to create goodwill? Warby Parker says, buy one, give one. Tom Shoe says, buy one, we give one. And so it's creating in each of us this donor mentality, so to speak. But
Hmm.
even more so than donor, it's saying, I am my brother's keeper. So we're seeing now in brand awareness this whole social consciousness that's coming to life and exciting us.
So well said. So, Faye, I'm turning it over to you to give to start the questioning, unless you want me to, but I'd love to turn it over to you.
So I'm happy to start the questioning, but you know what? I'm going to start the question. I know I'm supposed to ask Debbie the first question,
Yeah.
but when I was, scrolling through each of your websites and your LinkedIn pages today, I found something that Tarsha wrote.
Oh, great.
And so
Perfect.
I want to share that as a way of perhaps framing our conversation. So Tarsha says, begin building your personal brand. Personal branding is more than a name, logo, and color scheme. It is how you are perceived in the marketplace. What people are buying is you.
Wow.
And I think that that is a wonderful soundbite because again, it helps us to kind of frame our discussion.
Mhm.
What's in the brand? Is the brand this checklist, or is this brand this composite of the things that make us us? So, Tarsha, your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carrie and Faye, for having me here. And absolutely, I'm glad you found that that I wrote, because when you said that, I was like, what did I write? So when you say you found something she wrote on social media, you're like, oh my gosh, what did I write?
It's
It's all
okay.
good.
But what's interesting is that one of my favorite books is by Rick Warren, Purpose Driven Life. And in his book, he says that if you are alive, there is a purpose for your life. And I think that is so important in personal branding because, as I said, it's so much more than that logo, that color scheme. It really is about who you are, that authentic person that you are, and being able to communicate what you stand for. as a person, your values, your skills, your ability, and being able to communicate that, your purpose, your brand purpose in every single thing you do, whether it is your colors, as you all know, colors have meaning. And, if your purpose is to inspire people, then you want to have inspiring colors, right? Because that's part of who you are. And so for me, I that was part of the basis of me talking about that, is because as a person, we think about company brands all the time, but when we think about that personal brand, we're really talking about the essence of who we are and what we stand for.
Yeah, and there really is this intersection of the personal brand and this professional brand. And so so
Yeah.
Debbie says, there is this thing. It's truly this intersection. And what you said that really struck me, because I've spent the day looking at you now, and side note, I'm like, what? She's still running. It's all I can do to walk to the fridge and back. But we'll discuss that later. But very succinctly, very concisely, Debbie says, I am an experienced editor, writer, book coach. Having spent 20 plus years in-house managing business book programs, I know what agents and publishers look for. I help authors take a vague idea and turn it into a book. And when I read that, the first thing that jumped out to me was, I am an experienced editor, writer, book coach. So there is already this brand identification soundbite, if you will, but it also has the qualifying experience. And then at the end of it, what I really saw was that there was this implied target market need payoff. This thing that really says, I help authors take a vague idea and turn it into a book. So this whole thing, and what is my brand? It's there in 50 characters or less. And the personal brand and the professional brand comes out and comes clear. Can you speak to that?
Well, thank you. That was easy for me to describe. Somebody once said, you're a book shepherd. And I said, what do you mean by that? And they're like, well, you help us bring our books or our ideas to life. And for someone who's not experienced in the publishing arena, it's like learning a whole new language of how does this business work. But what I found, I switched over from magazine to book editorial. And I was given 6 months to start a business list, mostly personal finance books. So I thought, oh, great. I have some writers I worked with at the magazine. They'll be able to write a book. But I really wanted some financial planners who had great advice, but they hadn't written books. And they're like, oh, we're not a writer at all. And I went to one planner who had been my go-to expert. Whenever I needed a soundbite, whenever I needed something complicated explained to me, he walked me through it. So I said, I want you to write a book. He's like, no way. I can't write. This is hopeless. I said, no. How do you explain things so well to me as a journalist, and you work with clients? I said, isn't there some topic that you're interested in that you really want to help people with? And he said, well, actually, I just started coaching newlywed couples because I found that they had outrageous amount of debt because they threw themselves a lavish wedding. And they had no notion of how will they get from repaying the cost of the wedding to buying that house or raising their kids. And I said, okay, so what do you talk about with the couples? And he walked me through, well, first session, we identify their spending personalities. So I literally, listening to him talk about his client sessions, I was taking notes. And then I said, look, you have 8 sessions with your clients. We've got eight chapters to the book. And it was that moment where I realized that people have the knowledge, but sometimes they're not clear on how could they turn that into a book that would actually help somebody else. And so there are many authors I work with who already have the concept, but others would think, how will I ever write a book? I can't. And my feeling is everybody can author a book. They may need to have some help along the way, whether it's a ghostwriter or whether it's an editor. But if you are passionate and knowledgeable about a subject, there is no reason why you can't write a book. And what's really important, and to tie it back to building your brand, is it's great if you've got a podcast or you're on social media, but those messages don't necessarily last as long as people want. There's something about a book, in part because people think it's so hard to write, that really enhances your credibility. So if you, for example, let's say you've just started doing some speaking, but you want to get more speaking engagements, a lot of venues will say, what's the title of your book? Or when is your book coming out? It just enhances your credibility and establishes you as an authority and an expert.
And so when you're doing that, then there really then seems to be the overlap or the point of connection between the personal brand and the professional brand.
Absolutely. And most of the time, the book connects to their professional brand, but they're also bringing themselves. In other words, a business book is meant to help people, but a business book can be lively and engaging and the kind of book that everybody wants to recommend, or it can be more like a textbook that people will read out of obligation. And it's the authors who manage to bring themselves, their feelings, their goals, their mistakes, their missteps along the way, and they're willing to share their own experiences. That's what makes for a really strong business book.
So when we look at this then, so my takeaway here is, hey, if I'm trying to really brand or rebrand me, let me start writing my book.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what's good is there are so many options these days. So whether you self-publish or you work with a small publisher or you work with one of the large New York houses, there are many options, and there's no longer a stigma. Let's say a decade ago, if you self-publish, people kind of said, oh, is it a real book? As long as you produce a professional book that looks as if it came from one of the New York publishers, then that book will help you with your branding and help you grow your business.
So that professional book becomes the extension of that personal and professional brand.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. So Joyce, when we look at this, so everyone has their own soundbite. You said, when we work together, the focus is on the future. How does that relate to brand equity, brand awareness, building our personal or professional brands?
Well, when we talk about brands, right, we talk about aspiration, right? So those big brands that we were just looking at, those are big brands with big aspirations. And so I think even as a personal brand, you need to be aspirational, right, in terms of what you're looking toward. For that brand. So I think it's really important when we are building our personal brand, our professional brand, to really look like where do we see this brand in 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, right? In other words, if there's longevity to the brand. Many brands, I'm trying to think of the painter on PBS, his name is escaping me right now. But people still think he's alive, okay? Maybe because they see him on television, but he's a certain kind of brand that endures. So I do think that future.
That's a great example. I can't think of his name either, but
I see him.
Can Google it.
Bob Ross. Ross.
Bob Ross. So he's not alive anymore? Oh.
Right, Dad.
But he's hanging on many walls. So, when we look at the aspirational points that Joyce said that you speak about, Tarsha, you said to us, well, when I read Tarsha lists winning a contract with the National Football League for Super Bowl 45 as her biggest career defining moment to date. When I saw that, my immediate response was, why?
Why did I list that, or why was that
The biggest
career
career defining
defining
moment.
Yeah. While I didn't have aspirations to win a contract with the NFL, I think every business owner has that big ticket client that they aspire to have. And for me, it just so happened that it was the NFL during Super Bowl 45. And at that time, so that was a few years ago that I wrote that. Now it has changed because I'm more mature, have experienced a few things. And so now I would actually say it's something different. But, I feel that, again, whether you are a business owner or a career professional, it could be, if you're a career professional, it's that ultimate position that you've been working so hard to develop your skills personally and professionally to get. And so for me, as a business owner, that was what I, was looking as that big ticket client.
Yeah. It kind of it defined you as you weren't just making cookies in your oven at home.
That's
or whatever,
right.
Yeah. And
Definitely the opportunity, the exposure, because the Super Bowl 45 was here in Arlington, Texas. And, let alone there was a lot of media going around that. And then just to get the exposure and the access to individuals that I may not have gotten access to before, it really elevated my brand, my personal brand. And even to this day, people that I have networked with or on my email list, or if I run into them, they'll say, "Hey, I remember when you won that contract with the NFL." That's one of the things that they remember.
Yeah. And I guess at the top of the conversation, Carrie shared with us a little brand equity. So there was some brand equity that was being built.
Yes.
And when you were speaking, it reminded me, here's that, because I've just seen the clip when Sally Fields won the Oscar for whatever it was she was doing. She says, "You all like me. You really like me." And for her, then that was that affirming moment that says there is some validation here. There is some authenticity. So while we know that intrinsically, to have it externally validated sometimes really helps us to affirm what we already know, and then it challenges us to even go further. So, in this environment that we are in now, we talk about this new normal, but maybe a pause or a reset. And then we talk about now our discussion is branding. Everything is so virtual. How do we really use media presence strategically to help us to build the brand and to influence the brand perception?
Are you asking
And that's
Tarsha?
anyone
Oh, okay.
that has thoughts on it.
Well, the good news in a way is that books withstand pandemic and crazy situation. So while, and no doubt the industry faced a lot of challenges, warehouses being closed, bookstores being closed, books not being shipped, tons of speaking engagements and other appearances canceled. But the fact is that people were home and bought books. So the good news is that books, and whether it's physical books or ebooks, are being read and they're always available. I would say that authors who were counting on in-person events as the sole way to sell their books did have a rough time this year. And that affects people, particularly where it's memoirs, personal stories, where speaking before an audience and having people ask questions and then buy books at the end of the speaking gig, they had a rough time because somebody who has let's say, an incredibly moving story about overcoming some challenges, that doesn't translate as well in doing a Zoom presentation. People are just not clamoring to buy the book the same way they would if they were going to an event. And for many authors, they go out on the road and would have spent months talking to people.
Interesting.
But many other authors have adopted very well to doing their Zoom book signings, their sort of Facebook Live events. So authors have learned to adjust and still promote their books. And in fact, I know of relatively few in-person events that are scheduled for next year. So I think everybody is accustomed to remote events for the foreseeable future. And in fact, some organizations that regularly invite speakers have found that the virtual events work well, and as a cost savings, they're not sure they're going to go back to do in-person events. For example, there's a large group that I often speak, there are writers there, and they hold a publicity summit where members of the media come and the authors get a chance to pitch their projects or their companies. Essentially, they did a Zoom publicity summit. So there was teaching to a large group, and then there are breakout sessions where, just as if they were doing it in person, people had 3 minutes to make their pitch. And the publicist would say, the media outlet would say, great, please follow up and send me an email with your material, I'm interested, or no, the story's not quite right for me, have you tried, this? So I think that as with any industry, authors have to be creative and inventive and adjust with the changing times.
Okay.
We have two things. I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to make sure, Tarsha, how much time left do we have with you?
Oh, about 10 minutes.
Oh, 10 minutes.
10,
Right.
yeah.
Because we have a question in the chat room, Faye, and then
Right.
I want to follow up on one thing that Tarsha, again, it goes back to relationships, and I want to hear what she says about media. Thank you, Deb, for your comments. I have obviously this podcast, and I wanted to create a podcast several years ago. And Tarsha, you were one of the people I called. You recommended somebody. I guess you were doing a podcast. Somehow I looked to you as my source for podcasting, and thank you. You recommended Russ Johns, who I ended up using or hiring to help me develop the podcast. It took quite a bit of time doing the planning, creating the sound for the sound and broadcasting format. I would go with my creative director husband, Logan, to the Apple store on a probably weekly basis to learn GarageBand. We ended up meeting somebody at the Apple store who became our engineer. And I bring up all this. Eugene Pigeon became our announcer. He did the intro and the outro. He did the sound effects. And then we have to do the research for the logo and the guests. There's just a lot of intricacy to doing anything you decide to do. And the podcast, again, as well as books, it's based on relationships, but it's also based on, it's work. You have to do a lot of work to get these off the ground, and a lot of stamina. So in relation to that, Tarsha and Debbie, could you talk to that? And then we have a question in the chat room.
Can I address something that Faye said? And I'll also try to address it all in one thing. But going back to Faye with the media, and it relates to what Carrie is talking about, is in this environment, how do you position your brand in the media and get influence? And that could be social media or even in the earned media. So one of the things that I have had to do is not to use that phrase that everybody is using, pivot, but pivot a little bit And I pulled back from putting one message in the forefront to putting a different message in the forefront. And that other message still aligns with what my brand values are and my personal values, and that's really advocating for and supporting women and minorities who are entrepreneurs. So through the work that I do for a women's business center here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I'm able to leverage my personal brand, my experience, my own knowledge and expertise to now send out different kinds of messages that's very important and relevant right now, because as you know, small businesses are struggling right now. So I think that's one way of is thinking about, is there another thing that you are also passionate about? Because we all wear different hats. And sometimes there's a time and a place for a certain hat. And so maybe it's time now to put on this different hat that's also still part of your brand and bring that to the forefront. And part of utilizing the media is digital media. I mean, podcast has been around for a while. And actually, I started my podcast 12 years ago and stopped it after doing it for three years. I did it for 3 years, 2018. Yeah.
Wow.
And so it was still new. And right now the technology and it has greatly advanced. So it was a lot different when I started, and I struggled. I'll be honest with you, I struggled because people still didn't grasp the concept. It was just challenging to do. So I stopped. I was like, this is not making me money, and it's spending me, it's a lot of work involved with it. However, now is a great time to leverage that type of media, because technology has advanced so that people can easily access it, know where to listen to it. And it is a great way to add credibility to your brand.
Great.
That actually, Carrie, is a great segue to the question in the chat.
Yes, it is.